Metal Allegiance right here on the Classic Metal Show. And that's that. And here comes another one.
Yeah, there's that and this.
And now that's the short version of Let Darkness Fall. It's Metal Allegiance.
The 30-second teaser.
That drummer is something. All right, what we're going to do now, I am going to hit the call button. And this is going to be sloppy as fuck, but so be it. We'll see how this goes.
Welcome. This service is provided by freeconferencecall.com. Please enter your access code followed by the pound or hash sign.
Whatever you say, sweetheart. That would be this, this, and this, and then this, this, and this. And then hashtag fuck off.
If you are the host, press star now. Otherwise, please wait, and you will be... Please enter your PIN followed by the pound or hash.
All right. If that's what you'd like me to do, I will happily do that, sweetie. Now what? Oh, and then the hash.
This is enthralling.
Thank you. Please enter your PIN followed by the pound or hash.
All right, you fucking cunt.
If you do not know your PIN, please...
6 minutes to do this shit. I know.
No, but I couldn't hear it.
Please announce yourself.
Satan. Hello?
Hello.
Anybody there? Mark? John? No, John's not there. Yeah. All right, we are connected.
I'm here.
We are connected.
Mark's here.
Let me see. Who do we got here? First of all, we are doing the first podcast summit. I know this is sloppy as fuck, but whatever. On the line with John and Joe and myself is Mark Strigl. Hello, Mark.
Hey, Chris. How are you?
Good. Can you say something to absolutely hate? Like, oh, fuck you, man, because you guys are still supposed to hate each other.
I don't know. Yeah, give me a minute. I'll come up with something.
Nice. And, of course, Joshua Toomey is in here, I believe, as well, from the Talk Toomey podcast. What's up, man?
What's going on, Chris? How are you tonight?
Drunk, but all good. And
nice.
and Victor, I believe, is with us as well. Are you there, Victor?
I am here, sir.
Hello from the other side of the world, man. How are you?
I am doing well.
Wow, this is going to be great. You guys are really talkative tonight. All right.
We're just waiting to see if we're allowed to talk, right?
Toes here.
Well, here's what we'll do. I will be the leader of the pack here and ask some questions. I have a motive behind this, and the motive is pretty simple. I love podcasting, not just because I do it, but because I am one of these guys that has absolutely given up on radio completely. Satellite radio, terrestrial radio. Radio is gone for me. For me, it's all about podcasts and it's all about online. And to me, it's probably the wave of the future. For a lot of reasons. For one, the fact that you can say fuck and get away with it is a positive. It just is, because that's how people talk. But also because podcasters really don't try to do the corporate thing. None of us are driven by money. Unless I'm wrong, there isn't a one of us that's only making our living doing podcasting. And so it's kind of like a passion thing, but at the same time, it's one of those rare passion things where you can reach out to mainstream stars and and have something develop from it. So I think a good place to start is to maybe, and I'll throw this out to everybody, and I'll start with Mark. Podcasting, it does take a lot more effort than people understand. It takes a lot of commitment, a lot of scheduling, a lot of giving up free time to go and do it. And nobody's really doing it for anything but for fun, for the most part. So Mark, what is it about podcasting that made you get into it, and especially you, because you were way in before the curve, same as we were. What made you get started with it, and what makes you to continue to do it now?
I'll definitely answer that question, but the one thing that I think you said that's so right on is it takes effort, it takes commitment, and I get so many people always asking me, hey, I want to set up a podcast. Hey, I want to do a podcast. I want to interview people, and it's like people don't get what you said, that it takes effort, it takes a consistency, it takes, commitment, and it's not as easy. I think a lot of people listen to it and think, oh wow, these idiots, they can do it. I can do it too. But a lot of people can't, because they just don't have that commitment. And I think the thing that got me into it back in the day is I always wanted to have a radio show. I always wanted to talk to people, talk to the rock stars I loved, and ask them the questions I want to ask them, which are a little more geeky and a little more inside than your average, corporate FM radio guy or Sirius radio guy for that matter. And I just started reading about podcasts, and I started thinking, hey, I need to do one of these. And I was very inspired by Michael Butler of the Rock and Roll Geek Show. I'd heard his show, and he would sit there and drink beer and talk to, rock and metal stars. And I was like, if this guy is doing this, I should be doing this too. And got the RSS feed set up and just started making a go of it. And before you know it, we had publicists, coming to us saying, hey, will you guys interview Stryper? I mean, no one else was interviewing Stryper at that time,
Right.
So it was, at least not many people were. So I think it's been it reminds me of what fanzines were back in, when we were teenagers. They were these underground things that really dove into that style of music that we loved, that wasn't mainstream. And that's what attracted me to it. It was just the opportunity to ask these rock stars questions that I wanted to do. It took us a number of episodes before we could start booking guests, but once we did, it really, the floodgates just opened, and it was like, I couldn't believe we were getting Yngwie, we were,
right.
getting Stryper, we were getting Warrant and stuff. Just, 20 episodes in, we were getting these guys, so that's what attracted me to it.
Sure. What about you, Victor? Because I know you have a slightly different way that you got into it, don't you?
Well, I got into it, to be quite honest, and I've always sort of pandered towards Mark because of this. I was on the old Talking Metal forums, and being the anally retentive music geek that I am, they had put they were talking, I think it was about the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and they had incorrectly put the guitars in order, and I mentioned it on the forum. I said, no, actually, this is the way that these guys were in the band. This is the order that each one of these guys was in the band. And Mark responded and said, well, you seem to know a lot. Why don't you do your own show? And I wasn't sure if he meant, scram, kid, get out of here. Do your own shit, leave me alone. Or if he was being serious, that he thought I should get into podcasting. And I mulled it over. I started doing a podcast in Spanish at first because I wanted to do something different. And then being in the States, actually for my honeymoon, I met up with Mark for the first time, and he encouraged me to do something in English, which became Mars Attacks, basically. And thanks to Mark's involvement in helping, with that first initial push and opening a few doors here and there for me, I was able to kick off and do what I've done, and basically, try to do what I can with my shows and whatnot, and transition into doing other stuff with.
I opened doors for you.
Yeah, I mean, being able to sort of piggyback on the Talking Metal, name initially, and along the way, sure. There are a lot of people that, I can't tell you how many times that I'd go to ask for interviews, and people would say, well, if you can get us on Talking Metal, I'll give you the interview also. And it was like, no, I can, right. I speak for myself. I want them on my show. I can ask, but Talking Metal is Mark and John. I can do what I can to say, hey, these people want to come on the show, but I can't guarantee, everything. So, yeah, so being able to piggyback off of that, I mean, has helped open a lot of things. And over time, there have been certain people that I've worked with that have recognized what I've done with the podcast, and certain publicists, as you mentioned, that happened with Talking Metal, that would come along and say, hey, I want so-and-so to be on your show and whatnot. So, I mean, luckily it has evolved, not at the same scale, obviously, as Talking Metal or the Classic Metal Show, but, I've come to terms with that. It is what it is, that, as Chris said initially, you put a lot of time into it, you put a lot of effort into it, and I think after 7 some odd years of doing this, I believe, it sort of is what it is. It's not gonna garner $1 million, as you said, Chris, as a lot of people, and sort of what Mark mentioned, there are a lot of different name artists that have come along and said, oh yeah, my fan base is so big.
Right.
I can do this. That's easy. Everyone will come on board, and it's not. And I can name more than one big name artist, quote unquote, that, ditched doing shows after 6 to 8 months because they weren't making, the millions they thought they were going to be swimming in. So.
Right, sir. Now, Josh, you of course have, not only do you have the podcast, but you have it from a different perspective where I think the rest of us were pretty much just fans, but you've actually done it, when you were out there touring with Primer 55. So you've lived it on both sides of the fence. So talk a little bit about, you starting Talk to Me, but also about the perspective that you have, which is quite different than we do going into interviews.
Well, I think the main thing on this is I was lucky to get into a band that was actually touring and opening big shows and had an established name. And it's funny how many years later that, my time in Primer 55, which was, as you and I have talked about, was not the greatest of time for a lot of people, but it's garnered me a lot of avenues and a lot of attention for the show. And then it's also given me, a wealth of people that I can go into and say, hey, hey, would you like to do the show? Hey, man, I remember touring with you, blah, 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 and making relationships and things like that. So that was, kind of my in was being able to call up old friends and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing a podcast. Would you like to come on, be one of my first guests? And then, those names led to bigger names, and led to, the Dave Ellefsons of the world and things like that getting offered to me, which I think is absolutely insane because at the end of the day, I'm just a huge music fan. I was talking the other day with a guy about, music magazines and, how I would go to the grocery store when I didn't have any money and just sit in the magazine aisle and just sit on the floor and just read the magazines for free and, go through Metal Edge and Rip and Hip Raider and all those things. And what Mark, Strigl was saying a second ago about, how these are kind of like audio fanzines. And I truly see that. And I was thinking about that was, you sit down and you edit these yourselves and, you do everything yourselves and, it's cut and paste almost like, you were sitting at the Kinko's at 4 a.m.,
right?
Putting together your old fanzine. And, I've always loved that too. And then, with talking about how much goes into the show, it's like, the show could be an hour and a half long, 2 hours long, however long my shows are. But, you've got to do the website, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, book the guest, edit the guest, interview the guest. It's almost like a part-time job, almost a full-time second job that, not a lot of people see, which I think is, looking, I guess from this side of it, looking at you guys' shows makes me appreciate them so much more.
Well, that's sad to say if you're feeling influence from me. Well, let me go. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, one thing I like about you guys' show is, you guys do it kind of all at once, in a 6 hour span, and then chop it up so people have stuff to listen to each day, to where mine is, once a week. I do like what you guys do, how you guys chop it up and have, episodes throughout the week.
Sure. Well, thanks. Well, let me go a different way with you, Joe. Joe is he does a show on a slightly different platform from the traditional podcasting. He does his show on Songcast, which is songcast.com, and it's really much more geared away from the big artists and toward the independent artists. And quite honestly, Joe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way the industry is going these days, I really think what you guys are doing by giving kind of a mainstream push to unsigned and independent artists might just be the next wave of how these new bands are going to be found. Because clearly the way it's going now, there's 4 million publicists promoting 6 billion bands on quote unquote labels out of people's basements, and none of them are getting popular, but indies are more and more rising up. So talk a little bit about Songcast, as well as, what you're seeing from the independent scene and how the audience is morphing toward that somewhat.
Well, Songcast started out as a digital distributor for artists.
Okay.
We'll take your single, your album, put it on a number of different platforms, Spotify, Amazon, iTunes,
right,
on and on, Google Play. And then we collect the money for the artist, turn it over to the artist, so on and so forth. And the network of artists that we have grew so much that the owner decided he wanted to do a digital radio platform to give exposure to all of his artists. And I had done commercial radio for 20 years, and like you, hated it with a passion, and just watched the industry swirl down the toilet and just turn to shit.
Right.
And had the chance to do this, and I quit my commercial radio job to start doing radio shows for Songcast, and I'm actually making more money doing this than I was in commercial radio.
Right.
So it's been a great thing for me, and we have about 20 different genres. We have a metal channel, rock, jazz, country, blues, 20 different genres. It's all commercial free. It's free to stream, and it's basically indie artists from around the world. I mean, countries I haven't even heard of. From everywhere around the planet, we have artists, tens of thousands of artists, and it's just a great way to explore independent music, and whatever genre you're interested in, you can find great bands, and it's really a new way to discover music, I think, online.
It is, and the thing, and I'm going to stay with you for a second, Joe. The thing that I like about it is it's subscription based to the bands, if I understand it correctly.
Yes.
But it's tiny. It's not like it's like $600 a month for the privilege to be on. It's like what, $10 or $8 or something.
Yeah, it's cheap. It's cheap.
And they get royalty based on you actually going and doing a show. So if I'm in whatever band, and this is so different from the old days, even 10 years ago, if I'm in band X, I can sign up for $8 a month. Potentially, I can get you to do a show to feature my band. I can sell 1,000 downloads at $1 a piece or whatever. I can make 8,000 downloads, and I'll make $7,992 or something like that.
And your music is also on all the major platforms like Pandora, like Spotify and Google Play and Amazon and iTunes and all that stuff. So if you were an individual artist, to put your music on all those individual platforms one at a time would take a crazy amount of time.
Right.
And a lot of bands don't have the wherewithal or the interest in sitting down with their credit card and signing up on all these places and uploading all their music. We do it all for you. You upload the music one time to us. We aggregate it out to everybody.
Right.
And it's really a great way to spread your music around. And, not only will they get revenue streams from people that hear it on my radio shows, but it's also just out there, and the bands can promote it themselves, and they have their music for sale, and they really didn't have to sign up for 40 different platforms to do it.
And really, it's cheaper than even one, because I know, I've talked back and forth with Spotify about pulling our podcast in, and it's $29. It's $29 every time I want to do something with Spotify. So basically, I could do 3 months with you, and there's my promo.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
And we just came out with a brand new app. We used to be web-based only, and we've just come out with a new app for mobile devices, which is incredible. It hasn't been out for very long.
Right.
And you can download it at songcast.com. Mm-hmm. There's a link to the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, and then there's also a place where you could put in your email address and have a link emailed right to your phone. So the app is real easy to download, and it's completely free. When you first sign up, you have a choice of our 20 or so genres. You pick the genres that you want, and that's all you'll see. So if there's, if you hate jazz or you hate country, you won't see any of that.
Right. Now, since we're going all into all different directions, I'll throw it to you, John. you do the Nerfherder Council, which is yet another different kind of podcast. It strays away from the music, and it goes into pop culture. It goes into, obviously, Star Wars, which, Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock and all that stuff.
I was waiting for that.
It's all good. I like Kirk. He's good. But
never lived that down.
but I mean, seriously, your podcast kind of goes into, you take an established brand and you don't leave yourself a whole lot of room, and you literally, and it's the difference between what every one of us is doing so far. You can't stretch out. I can stretch out and go from Metal Church to Yngwie to Lamb of God, and Talking Metal does the same stuff, and Victor does the same stuff, and Josh can call his old friends in Flybanger or whatever band from the mid-'90s he wants to. You have to kind of stay within the envelope of 8 hours a movie and really find different topics. So, I know you're a Star Wars dork, but... Dork.
There's a difference between nerds and dorks, trust me.
Yeah, you're the dork.
No, I am not, believe me.
What is the difference between a nerd and a dork? I'm curious.
Really.
I can actually define this very quickly. I fully admit to being a Star Wars nerd. I was waiting at the Star Wars convention 3 years ago to see one of the panels, and there was a kid next to me that started talking to me about the different Sith Lords, like Vader and Palpatine, and all of a sudden he starts talking about the ones from the books, and I went... To be honest with you, dude, I'm not familiar with the books. I don't know those. And he looks at me literally with contempt on his face, and he goes, "You don't know all the Sith Lords?" Ugh. And I was so pissed. I looked at him like, "Yeah, but you know what I do know how to do? How to get a woman without my credit card number, dude." So
you say that like that's bad.
So anyways, yeah. That guy was a dork. I'm a nerd. So.
All right. No. The definition.
All right. Go ahead, sweetheart. You're always allowed to talk.
Difference between a nerd and a dork.
Yes. Cock size?
No. A nerd is fuckable.
A nerd is fuckable? Really?
Yes.
So if you really liked a dork, you wouldn't give him a sympathy fuck?
This is why I love my show. As soon as you bring up my show, the whole thing goes off the rails.
Well, I'm going to bring it back to the rails because we got a lot more questions to get to, and
right.
I don't want to monopolize on your stupid-ass show. But my question is, and you've been doing it about a year, and you're slowly getting momentum going, and it's hard because, again, your topic is so defined.
And there's a million other Star Wars podcasts,
right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a million other rock podcasts, too, but yours is so much. You can't really go out and say, you know what, I'm going to do a fucking podcast today on the Godfather movies.
Yeah.
You're really stuck into, Star Wars and one specific topic. So talk a little about how you guys keep it fresh and keep it interesting without, getting boring or going through the same old every time.
Well, I will say, and I've told you this before, I take a lot of direction from your guys' show because what you guys do is a little different. I mean, I ripped off your guys' intro. We have our own little intro, as people that have listened to my show, that listen to this show know. But really, I mean, there are a ton of Star Wars podcasts, and the norm in the podcasting universe for Star Wars is to discuss the current news, the current events. Like, well, here's the latest rumor, or here's the latest comic book.
Right.
And we knew that, and basically what we do is, my brother and I, my brother being the co-host, and then our buddy Steve, our other co-host, there's three of us, we always sit around and bullshit Star Wars. And we start having beers and drinking, we just start debating stuff. Like, if Palpatine would have done this, it would have been different. No, it wouldn't have. And AJ and I at the last Star Wars convention were like, well, there has to be a market for this where it's just people bullshitting about Star Wars and giving their opinion, because you never hear that.
Right.
So we decided, why don't we just put a mic in front of our face, give it actual production value, which I think is the most underrated aspect of having a podcast, because as you guys have stated, anybody can do a podcast. It's so easy to do now, but people underrate what your production quality really means to having an actual serious podcast and people taking you seriously. So we just decided to get some good equipment, make it sound good, and just sit down and go, you know what, like our last episode was, well, now we've got Rogue One, now we've got Episode 7, 2 movies that George Lucas did not make. We're going to compare them and see what they did right, see what they did wrong, now that George Lucas is not involved. Instead of going, well, this rumor came out about Episode 8. Like, no, it's just like, what would you talk about if you're a Star Wars fan? What would you talk about with your friends? And what would you think? Like, and go ahead, I see you laughing, you asshole. But yeah, I mean, that was our concept. So we wanted to keep it different. And in terms of finding content that's different every week, it's really just kind of, we research what's going on in the news for where Star Wars is concerned. But
sure,
having seen the movies so much, there's always something you look at and go, well, I kind of have an opinion on that. And then we bring it to the table. And really, after we have the genesis of a little topic, we just let the conversation flow.
Sure.
So
very cool.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to swing this back to, I'm going to bring it to myself, and I'm also going to bring it to Mark, because
yes.
to my knowledge, we're the only two that I think have done a similar type of a thing here. And I could be wrong. And if I am, somebody jump in and tell me. But the one thing that we have both had, A, the opportunities to do, and B, have done, is some live performance stuff. And Mark, I will definitely ask you to talk about the hassles of doing that, because you actually played in the bands, and, you know, me, I just sat behind a desk and got drunk at a bar and did it. But these are to do something live, to actually go into a club and broadcast bands and switch back and forth between the band and on stage and off stage, and, you know, try to do, for us, it was 5-6 hour shows of, was a monumental task, you know, with computers and getting internet right, and, you know, getting mic checks from the stage. And it was just unbelievably difficult for us. And we've done 8-10 live events. And, you know, for me, it was very hard to do. I'm curious for you, because you guys did so many of those performance ones where it was, you know, you and John would team up with, you know, Blitz from Overkill, and, you know, and I don't know, and this drummer and that drummer, like, name guys. Talk about how difficult that was, not necessarily to do the jams, because let's face it, you know, if you're a musician, you can play certain songs, but scheduling, getting everybody on board, getting labels to not bitch that you're using their artist. You know, talk a little bit about how difficult those live performance things that you guys were doing were. Well, you know, when we did 2 rounds of it, and the first time we did it, we were doing it with this television station, Fuse, and then it wasn't that difficult. I mean, we had to learn the songs, and it was on a big major platform, and everyone agreed to do it in this moment. You know, Anthrax, Bobby Blitz, Exodus. And it wasn't all that difficult. It wasn't we weren't streaming it live. It was recorded, and, you know, there was a Pro Tools rig, and that wasn't that hard, honestly, for me personally. However, then a number of years later, in 2012, I was seeing, hey, we're getting 300,000 views on those live Talking Metal jams on YouTube. Let's do more of them. And this time, it was Talking Metal independent, you know, and then it was a lot harder. You know, people weren't lining up to come jam with us, and you know, it was more like we called on our friends. We had Rob Dukes and Dan Lorenzo and Ron Lipnicki from Overkill and some other guys, and that was much more difficult, because I of course had to pay out of pocket to have a guy come in with a Pro Tools rig and record it, and you know, line up a studio in New York City to do it, and it was a ton of effort. And you know, I'm proud of the way the stuff turned out, but again, it was a lot of effort, which, you know, this kind of goes off in a different direction. But the thing that drives me absolutely crazy about these publicists, about these labels, and even the musicians themselves, as much as we love them, is that they are so impressed by corporate America. Right. So as soon as you say, hey, this is going to be on Sirius, or this is going to be on
MTV or VH1 or this is going to, this is somehow going to be on, I mean, even the iHeart Radio. I mean, I think all our shows probably stream on iHeart now, or at least are rebroadcast on iHeart. It's like these artists and publicists, they're so fucking stupid. It's just like as soon as they hear a name like iHeart Radio, they get a big fucking hard on. They want to, give you the artist. But it's so the one thing I remember most about those Talking Metal jams is we did them with Fuse, we did them without Fuse, and they were extremely difficult without Fuse, and it was because we couldn't. I mean, I remember a guy like Russell Allen, not to call people out, but he was going to do it, but as soon as he found out that these aren't going to be on Fuse, or these aren't going to be on, or it may have been his publicist that found it out, not him,
right?
But they canceled and they didn't do it. So, it's I think, it's always difficult when you try to do these things on your own. I can imagine with, the Classic Metal Show trying to do a live stream on your own without a corporate company behind you doing it. It's got to be difficult and hard to pull it off.
Well, it really, the thing that, they're always fun. And Lord knows there's been many occasions when I've gotten a little too drunk at these things. But the piece people do not realize is that if, for us, when we did live ones, and we've done, I think, roughly 10 live ones where we had bands, national bands, friends, not always national bands. We had fun just doing it. What people don't realize is, for a 9 o'clock start, we had to be at the club at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon to get in there, to get all the laptop set up, to run a feed from the board, to test the internet, which was always shit. It might be better these days, but the last one we did, we were doing it off of Wi-Fi from a DSL and trying to broadcast to 3,000-4,000 people. It was there's a lot of technical that goes into it, and it's very difficult to do. And you're right. The publicists, they don't want to hear anything about it. It might. Do you think? And I'll ask Mark this, and I'll throw this to anybody really after Mark answers. But do you think that now that podcasting has become a much more legitimate medium, that it's going to be less difficult to get bands, or do you think it's still going to be people that are like, well, if you're not Eddie Trunk, fuck you?
It's a tough question. It's like, we've tried to get any member of Metallica for years, and I've just been totally unsuccessful in that. And I actually remember speaking with Kurt Hammett's assistant. I had gotten his cell phone number and cold called him, literally, which was kind of bold to do, and just ask him if I could get Kurt Hammett on Talking Metal. And he was like, what's this? And I was like, it's a podcast. And he was like, oh, we don't do podcasts. We look for big media outlets, which I thought was such bullshit, because this is supposed to be a band that was all about the fans and even Lars still has a relationship with Bob Nalbandian, and it's because of Bob's fanzine back, decades ago. And it's just funny that how they've totally turned their back on the fan-based media outlets that are run by the fans, So, I don't know if I'm answering your question, kind of going off on a tangent here, but it's just like, it's what's that?
Go ahead.
Nothing. I'll actually jump in here, and actually, I posted about this the other day. Was with Metallica's last album, Hardwired came out, and James goes on Joe Rogan. James and Kirk were on the Nerdist. James was on Mark Maron, and I'd actually jokingly posted. I was like, "Thanks, Metallica, for looking out for the actual metal podcast." It was really strange to see those guys, go on all the huge ones, but I doubt any of us, are going to get any of those guys anytime soon.
Yeah, probably not. I mean,
to me, if I could throw something in here, that kind of surprises me with bands of that level, especially guys like Metallica, who were like the ultimate DIY band back in the early 80s. Like, they don't need the exposure anymore. It's like that's one of those bands, and maybe I'm just kind of grandstanding here for those of us little guys, but
you are.
Well, it would seem like it'd be kind of a cool opportunity for them to kind of reach a more grassroots audience that might not be into them, because everyone's going to listen to Eddie Trunk, everyone's going to listen to Joe Rogan, but I don't know, like it just seems like they would be more open. A band of that size where they don't have to use it for a promotional vehicle would be more open to going on a show like one of your guys' shows. I don't know. I'm surprised they wouldn't do that.
I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you the answer I've been given. I don't believe it necessarily. I don't believe the bands know it all. But the answer that I've been given, and as you know, John, I have a friendship with Jason. So whenever Metallica was in town, when Jason was in the band, I always had the hookup, which was great.
Right.
You know, I could always get Jason on my show just by literally calling him. And that was awesome, you know. And that helped both the classic metal show, and it helped the metal show that I was doing on WMMS back in the day, because I had a pipeline to the biggest band in the world. That being said, what the publicists will tell you now is, why should they do 10 podcasts that'll get 25,000 listens when they can do Rogan and get 500,000 listens? So for them, they always go with we're just going to do the big ones so that we can get
fruit.
Yeah, we can do 10 interviews instead of 50 and reach the same number of people.
Yeah, for a band like Metallica, I think at some point, at least if I was in their position, and I never will be, none of us will be, but it just seems like, why not take those requests here and there? I mean, it's, especially knowing where they came from, I don't know.
'Cause they're rich, man!
That's why they don't need to worry about going on Trunk.
Nice. Well, I want to move into a topic that I think most of us have dealt with. Joe, I know you have. I have. Mark, I know you have. I think we all have. And I'll start with Josh, but we'll kind of leave this one open to whoever wants to jump in on it. Let's talk about controversial interviews and when guys say stupid shit that they shouldn't say. Josh, you are the most recent victim, which is why I went with you, with your Keith Caputo, Mina Caputo, whatever we're calling that today, said some bizarro shit. I mean, absolutely bizarro stuff. And now you have to kind of answer the questions for it, because the audience, and it's the unique thing about podcasting, the audience can't go to Mina and ask, well, what did you mean when you said that people are really jerking off to me? You know, they're going to come to you
right,
because they can reach you. They can actually throw something on Twitter or whatever, and you'll answer it. So talk about what happens when you get an artist saying some crazy shit. Are you happy about it? Are you apprehensive that you have to kind of put your name on that? Where do you fall with that?
Well, I mean, honestly, when people come on and they, say something crazy, like, Mina talking about the people that don't approve of her lifestyle and everything else are just secretly going home and jerking off to photos of her on the internet, that's obviously, when you're in the interview and you hear that coming through the headphones, you're like, oh my God, that's insanity. And then Glenn Benton coming on a while back and telling Corey Taylor to blow him, all that stuff. And honestly, I love it. I love the headlines, and I love honestly, I thought it was kind of funny that the Mina Caputo episode actually didn't get any kind of blabbermouth love, which, we'll still talk about that. But that episode brought a lot of people to the show, and that episode brought a lot of messages to me, text messages from friends that I hadn't talked to in a little while. And I don't mind answering those questions. And, I asked a lot of questions. I asked a lot of, I asked if she was worried about, going through the hormone changes, was she ever worried about losing her voice? I don't think a lot of people are going to ask that question. And, you kind of have to be a little bit fearless, especially in some of those topics, to ask those questions and not, pussyfoot around, the answers or the questions of those people. So in all honesty, I love, a little bit of controversy. I think it adds a lot of fun. It's not your typical, what was the inspiration behind that song? What was it like playing with Pantera? What was it like? Any of those questions. It's not like that. When you can truly sit down and ask somebody, off the wall question such as, were you worried about losing your deep voice taking estrogen? That's got to be insane.
Go ahead, Victor.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is not a difficult question, but this is sort of the catalyst for me going on and starting Earpeeler, because what Josh just mentioned, he had a great interview, and certain outlets didn't pick up on it, and I'm surprised that they didn't, because they're always waiting for, Lars Ulrich wanted to give me a reach around an 86 type of a headline, and unless you have that, they're not carrying, your interviews on the quote-unquote big or classic sites, which is a shame, because there's, as we referenced before, there's a lot of shows that hosts put a lot of work into doing what they do. I had an instance where, for example, I talked to John Bush and talked about a variety of different things, including some of the stuff with Anthrax. And one of my questions was, why did it make sense for him to join Anthrax and not Metallica? And he went on and talked about, his reasons. And that was like one of the only things that was ever picked up. And it's cool that they come on and divulge certain things with us, or controversial things, but it also sort of sucks to another extent that you get something like that and you're like, wow, this is gold. There is no way that, that this isn't going to be picked up. There is no way that, this isn't going to get X amount of downloads. And then all of a sudden you're waiting, and, you're left with blue balls, per se, waiting for that interview to take off or whatever, when you think you have something great, that you've released, and it just doesn't get the notoriety that certain things do, and you sort of don't know why. So again, not to say to myself here. Go ahead.
And Victor, when you talk about, when you talk about an interview taking off and going someplace and blowing up, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we're talking about one website, because
yep.
Let's face it, Blabbermouth is the website that has to pick this shit up for it to go viral. Not always, but usually. I mean, I've had Brave Words, and who I love Tim at Brave Words, a friend of mine, but Brave Words picking something up and Blabbermouth picking something up, to me, the difference is thousands of additional downloads and streams, and half the people won't even download and stream it. They'll just read what Blabbermouth transcribed from your interview. I mean, to me, that, and I have so much, through the years, I've had so much frustration where it's like, I feel like I have some big scoop, and Blabbermouth just completely ignores it, and other times they pick up a story that I don't even understand why they're picking it up, because I don't think it's newsworthy. Of course, I'm always happy when they pick up one of my things, but it's just like Blabbermouth is, to me, the one website that I'm always hoping is going to pick stuff up. But also, I fucking get fucking pissed off when they don't pick up stuff that I consider newsworthy or good.
Right. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, there have been many episodes where they've picked up stuff from my show, and what I think is going to be the Blabbermouth clickbait, they go with something completely different and almost not clickbaity at all.
Same here.
So yeah, and Blabbermouth, to me, I'll piggyback on what you said. It is a difference of thousands of listens. I've had episodes get picked up by like the PRP, and then maybe like Loudwire, and Loudwire has almost 500,000 more followers on Facebook. But that episode, it'll do well, but it won't do Blabbermouth well. But as soon as you can just watch it, if you watch your numbers and Blabbermouth picks something up, you can just click refresh, and it's like hundreds and hundreds over and over. It's crazy how much power Blabbermouth has, especially for the podcast interview world.
Right.
Yeah. And Loudwire is a crazy thing too, because they have offices in Midtown Manhattan that are like they have to just be thousands and thousands of dollars a month to rent the office space, and a big staff, I mean, I have no clue how Loudwire stays in business. I have no clue because they're spending, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars, a month to stay in business. It's very much a mystery. I like the website, but I scratch my head over stuff like that.
Right. Go ahead, Joe.
Isn't that the same with all the New York-based things with Loudwire, Metal Injection, and all of them? No,
Metal Injection, Metal Sucks. Those are small operations, and they're guys in their apartments in Brooklyn, and they're very not corporate. They're small based operations, and it makes sense that how they work 60 hours a week on that website. It's like two guys, but Loudwire to me is a complete mystery as to even Blabbermouth. I mean, it doesn't seem like they have a super big staff. Doesn't Atlantic Records or something own Blabbermouth at this point? So I know there's definitely some corporate money involved, but I might be wrong on that, but that's what I've heard. But Loudwire is very much a mystery to me.
I haven't really had that much experience with it on my podcast since I'm dealing with indie artists, but I did have it happen fairly regularly, especially when I was out of state doing commercial radio and doing a metal show on commercial radio.
Right.
And anytime you hear that stuff going through the headphones where you know that the person is extra fucked up or they're saying something that's just beyond what they would say when they were in their sane mind, I always love that because you knew it was going to generate a ton of publicity, and any publicity is great.
Sure.
Ricky Metlock's talking about jerking off. Fine by me. That's gonna hit the newspaper, and it's gonna make more people listen. But I'm not really dealing with a lot of major label and superstar artists on my podcast, so I really haven't had a whole lot of that happen through Songcast.
John, have you had that with your big R2-D2 interview?
I have not.
Did C-3PO tell you to fuck off?
I would, like I said, the only interview.
Does he have a squeaky elbow from jerking it?
Hey, look, the only interview I've ever done Star Wars related is actually an absolutely enormous interview Star Wars related, and it was completely at random, eating lunch at a Star Wars convention, and Ben Burt, who literally is
Ben Burt.
Yeah, well, exactly. He basically is the father of modern movie sound, and he did all the original sounds for Star Wars, and it did all the original 6 movies. From
this question.
No, I'm saying I sat. He's like, hey, do you guys got a seat at your table? And I was like, yeah. And he sat down. We're just bullshitting with Ben Burt, so I got to talk to him, and this was years ago, and of course there's no mics, and it was so I have no cool stories except for that. It's like, I don't have any experience in that kind of thing.
Right. Well, one that we've all had, and John, you've had this too when you worked for Music's Bottom Line back in the day. So we've all had this one, and I'm going to throw this out. I'm going to have Victor answer it first, and then we'll just kind of go around the room here. Let's talk about the nightmare interview. We've all had it. We've all hated it. We've all struggled our way through it. So, Victor, you don't have to say who it was unless you want to, but talk about your worst nightmare that you've had interview-wise.
Well, there are two, and one actually happened this week. I sort of mentioned it to Josh and Mark before we went on air, but the absolute worst, I would say, is someone who got their notoriety, and some people will know who this is, but I'm not going to mention him by name. He got his notoriety from singing with a former member of KISS. And so I have all these questions lined up for this guy, and in about 7 seconds, he basically says, well, so-and-so was good to me, and I'm not gonna answer any more questions for him. And I was like, well, why else are you on here then? I really have nothing else for you. And he winds up by saying, well, there's another thing I could tell you about. I helped write the ending theme to SpongeBob SquarePants. I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. So, 20 minutes of allotted time basically went to, 7 or 8 minutes because he didn't want to answer anything that I had lined up for him. And earlier this week, I had someone that that you guys had on recently who was just a nightmare to convince him to come on the phone. I actually had to call him like 5 times. 5 times one night where he stood me up, and then 5 times then I kept getting excuses from him to call him back in a few minutes till I got him on. And when one of my first questions was how I dug a certain album, yeah, that's definitely not one of my best albums. It's like, okay, well then, where's this going? I ended up cutting out like 5 questions in the interview because I just wanted to get off the phone. It's just one of those things where it's like, fuck it, this isn't going the way that I want, and similar to what we're all saying, this is going to be more effort than to sit here and just get some stupid fucking response out of this guy. So I just sort of cut my losses and then the interview. So
right. Chris from Decibel Geek, I think you have joined the party. Decibel Geek podcast. Chris, what about you? You got a nightmare story? Or maybe he's not here.
I'm not sure he's here. Yeah, he said he says I'm not going to, in the chat room or the chat we have going on. He said I'm not going to make it in time tonight, guys. Sorry.
Yep. Well, I'll tell my story, and then Mark, you can go after this. Mine actually is not a podcast story. This is back when I owned Music's Bottom Line, which was it was a print magazine, came out every 2 weeks, and this is one of these where the publicist offered me X and then fucking pulled the rug out from under me. And Music's Bottom Line, so that people know, was not only metal, it was anything. And basically I had a bunch of metal guys and me. So I was the one that interviewed every non-metal band there was because I was the only one that would listen to it. So the publicist offers me the Backstreet Boys. And this is when the fucking Backstreet Boys were huge, and I was like, all right, I can move some papers with the Backstreet Boys, sold out show at the time, the Gund Arena. So they've sold 20,000 tickets. I was like, yeah, I'll definitely do this. Well, the publicist tells me, well, we'll let you interview the Backstreet Boys, but you have to interview the opening band too. And I was like, okay, sure. And the opening band was this chick named Michaela. And she never went anywhere, quite obviously. But I interviewed Michaela. Nice girl. She was young. She was like 15, 16 years old. It was like Arista Records' version of Britney Spears, kind of. But not nearly as talented or hot. So it was like... I do this interview with this girl who has nothing to say. Every question I asked her was, I don't know. My dad handles all that. Every fucking question was that. So I do like 20 minutes trying to find something with Michaela. Don't find anything. And at the end of the interview, Michaela says to me, I do the typical, well, thanks for your time, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, well, I don't let anybody end an interview with me unless I sing to them.
I remember this one.
And I was like, what? And she's like, I'm going to sing. And she goes into like a stage intro. She's like, this next song I'm going to do is one of my favorite Christian songs of all time. This is Amazing Grace. And she sings Amazing Grace to me on the phone. And at the end of it, I was like...
Was that when you became a Satanist?
Yeah, pretty at the end of it, I didn't know what to say, so I was like, okay, thanks. I mean, how do you answer that? Right. And then, of course, she was hurt that I didn't praise her from her rendition of Amazing Grace. Called the publicist, and the publicist pulled my Backstreet Boys interview.
Oh man.
Well, Chris, I kind of have to piggyback off of your question. I have a very quick story, and then it leads into a question for everybody. So since horrible interview stories, so I have a horrible interview story, which leads me to a question. So my horrible interview story was when I took over Music's Bottom Line from you. I interviewed Head PE, and this was early 2000s.
Okay.
Probably like 2001, 2002. And I was recording the interview, and I think I was interviewing the bass player. And out of nowhere, he stops he's answering one of the questions that I had about the new record, and he just starts going into this absolute tirade about two of his band members.
Okay.
I think I told you this story. I called you afterwards like, oh my God, I got gold. And this guy's like, well, this dude's fucked up on drugs, and this guy was shooting up, and then this guy was looking at kiddie porn. I mean, he was dishing the worst shit you could ever imagine. I'm just sitting there going, okay, and like just getting the guy to keep talking. And he rambled for like 15 minutes just destroying his band. And I'm like, this is going to be the greatest interview ever. So I finished it out. I'm like, this is fantastic. And I checked the recording, and the recording device had broken about 5 minutes in, so I lost the whole damn thing.
Oh, man.
So I was like, I have no proof of this, and this is the most amazing conversation I've ever had with a musician. But have you guys ever had that where you get like absolute, like just an incredible interview, and for some reason there's no evidence of it? Has that ever happened to you guys?
I did an interview with Lizzie Borden.
That happened to me once. Yeah, Frankie Benelli.
I did one with Lizzie Borden.
Joe, then Mark. Go ahead.
It was a great interview with Lizzie Borden, track by track on the new album, went into all kinds of detail about stuff. And it was back when my daughter was 2 years old.
All right.
Sitting in the living room, watching TV. My daughter comes walking through the living room with the cassette tape in her hand. I'm like, oh my gosh, Rachel, you got to give that to me. And I'm drinking this giant cup of iced tea or whatever, and she walks up to me like she's going to hand it to me and drops it right in the iced tea. Worst interview story was for sure Joey Belladonna from Anthrax. It was a State of Euphoria tour. I was writing for a magazine and doing a radio show, and he was just a dick, just a colossal, condescending dick.
Joey? I heard he's like the nicest guy ever.
I've talked to him since then, and he was great. I don't know if he was just having a bad day, but it was the first time I interviewed him, and he was just a colossal ass. And about 5 minutes into the interview, I just screamed, fuck off, and hung up the phone. And
wow.
I had requests to play that back on the air, just the last part of that where I hung up on him a bunch of times. And there was one with Ace Frehley, I think it was Trouble Walking Tour, where he was so hammered on the phone that he couldn't even answer a question. So I just fucked with him the whole interview and just asked nonsense questions and watched him try to figure out what I was saying.
Right.
And it was more for my amusement, just to try and salvage because I couldn't get anything out of him.
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, you know, the rudest guy that I ever interviewed was an actor, actually, and it wasn't for Talking Metal, but it was for my TV gig. A guy named Kevin Pollak, who ripped me apart. Made me feel like he basically told me he was like, who gave you this job? You wrote these questions? These are awful. I mean, it was bad. I mean, that was for a sci-fi show I was working on. But as far as the podcasts go, the two that stick out, and I know there's probably been more than this, but the two that I can remember off the top of my head, Fieldy from Korn, so fucking rude, and we had recorded the interview, and we wondered if we should even post it, but we did, and of course we got all sorts of emails from people saying, oh, what a dick, what an asshole, and he obviously did not want to be doing the interview. The other one, which I always wanted to ask you about, Chris, was a guy I freaking loved and loved his band, Jizzy Pearl, Love Hate. Yeah. And Victor, I think you did this interview with me, and he just seemed like he did not want to be talking to us, was not into us, and I always wondered if, because there was a time Talking Metal and Classic Metal show didn't really get along all that well, and I always wondered if I know, aren't you guys friends with him? And I always kind of wondered if it was because he was not into Talking Metal because he loves Classic Metal show or something like that. Any insight to that?
I'll be very honest. I never poisoned the well with any bands. I certainly sent you all my spam mail and all that other horse shit that I did for years. But but no, I honestly, even, and I'll tell you, the only time it was ever asked of me, I'll be very honest with you, the only time I was ever asked if it was okay if a band did Talking Metal was when you guys talked to Don Dokken. And because I was I was Don's web guy, and Neely is of course friends with Don, and Don asked us if it was cool, and we both were like, yeah, go ahead. We're not trying to. The interview, look, we had not that I want to dig into the old feud because I don't, but there was plenty of fuel without going that route, and
yeah.
So, yeah, the only time I was ever asked anything was by Don, and we both, Neely and I both said, yeah, go. You know, not a problem to us. Go ahead, Josh.
I guess Jizzy Pearl just didn't ask then. I mean,
is there more than one way to get the nickname Jizzy?
Oh, did I say Dizzy? Jizzy. Yeah, Jizzy.
Is there more than one way you get that nickname? I can't think of more than one.
A chest, a glean, I don't know. All right, go ahead, Josh. I know you've got one.
All right, actually, this is well, the band is, I guess, a friend of Mark's also. But when I was Primer 55, 2007, that tour we did, we had Frank Fauntleroy of Stuck Mojo on drums. So when I started the podcast, one of the guys I asked on early was Frank, and he comes on, and I've got a question about Frank. What's it like playing with the difference between Bones and Chris Jericho, which is an insane question to begin with, but. I was like, and I asked him something along the lines of like, what is it like to be in a band with a real singer? And what I meant by real singer was not a rapper. Okay. And Bones heard that interview, and then his guitar player in his Bones band reached out to me and said, hey, Bones would like to come on the show and, do whatever. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. So I set up the interview. We get on the interview, and Bones and I talked for about 20 minutes prior to going quote unquote live. And as soon as I said, all right, man, well, let's do this interview, he goes, all right. And I was like, so you got this new Bones record out, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, well, have you heard it? And he immediately attacks me. And I was like, we talked for a minute, and then he's like, what's this real singer stuff and blah, blah, blah. And he's going in at me, and I'm going back at him. And, I'm not going to back down to this. And we go back and forth, and my wife still laughs to this day about how I truly never ever once said to him that he was a good singer. I just kind of, kept arguing with him about it. And I don't know, it's always been a funny episode, and people still bring that up to this day about that interview alone, just, 20 minutes of Bones and I arguing about who's a better singer, him or Chris Jericho, which on every level is insanity.
Right.
And then going into the technical difficulties, I had an issue with my laptop, and I had an interview with Biff Byford, and, wherever he is in England or whatever, and I get the interview, and we finally get all the technical issues, what I think is done, and I do this great 20-minute interview, and he's telling me all these great stories about playing, early Metallica shows and playing with Motorhead and, following the Sex Pistols or, playing a couple of days after the Sex Pistols in all these clubs, and, they'd have destroyed the clubs and things like that. And then I listen back, and it's just me. It's me asking questions and then silence. I was like, motherfucker. But he graciously understood and actually redid the interview, which the second time around wasn't as great, but he still was pretty good.
It's funny that you say that, because when I had that Lizzie Borden incident, he was gracious enough to do the interview over for me as well, and I was really grateful for that.
Nice. Well, here, I'll tell one that'll probably surprise most people. John, I think you've heard this before, but everybody else will probably be surprised about this. My first ever hang-up, which I've had several because, believe it or not, I'm controversial.
Who knew?
But my first ever hang-up was Don Dokken. And
I remember this, yep.
And it was on the Shadow Life. They were doing press for Shadow Life. And Don was not particularly talkative. And Don's one of them guys, if you know him, he'll talk all day long. If you don't know him, it's a lot of yes, no. If you give him an option to say yes or no and he doesn't know you, he ain't expounded. He'll be, oh, so you recorded a new album? Yes. It's like, all right, thanks a lot, Dick. Yes. But this was the first time I had spoken to Don, and I couldn't get anywhere with him. Everything was real short answers. Oh, you recorded with Wynn Davis? Yeah, for the third time. Okay, thanks. I mean, it was really a tough interview. So I started looking for what I call conversation points, and I'm sure you guys all do this too, where if you're not getting anywhere, you just start throwing questions against the wall looking for any kind of an in to talk about. So I asked him what I thought was an innocuous, stupid question, which I do not ever use unless I'm really struggling. And the question was, where does this record stand in the Dokken catalog? And what I was looking for was anywhere to go. And he goes, well, it's the best thing we've ever done. And I said, really? And he's like, you don't think so? And I said to him, I said, are you asking me my opinion? And he's like, yeah, what do you think? And I said, dude, this is the worst piece of shit you've ever done. I was like, your voice sounds terrible. George's guitars are awful. The drums sound like they're recorded still in the box. I was like, this album sucks. And he goes, well, fuck you, man. And he hung up on me.
I think that story speaks to your ability as a salesman, because after that interview, you ended up being their webmaster and making money off of them. So.
Well, there is that, but you know what? And everybody on here knows this to be a true statement. If you're honest with these guys, you will get a hell of a lot further than if you kiss their ass, because everybody kisses their ass. I mean, you don't have to be a dick, which sometimes I am, but if you're honest with them and you just say, look, dude, that didn't move me, and I liked this, but I don't like that, and you tell them honest. These guys know.
I think if you can convey to them and let them know that you're a fan and they understand that you're a fan, it makes a world. Even if you ask a question that might not be as good as the fluff everybody else asks, but if it's a question that they know you're a fan, they'll respond a lot better.
Let me tell a real true story about one of the all-time legends of the game calling me out, Ronnie James Dio. And it was like my third ever interview I'd ever done. I couldn't believe it. My first interview I ever did, Johnny Gill from New Edition. And second interview, Philip Anselmo. Third interview, Ronnie James Dio. So in my world, that's like, wow, am I up in the bar? Yep.
Right.
But I had written this horrendous review. This was on Angry Machines. And I had killed this fucking record. I literally had written, in my summary of the record, I said, listening to Ronnie James Dio today is kind of like watching Lyle Alzado die. I said, I said it was like once heroically strong person, now a meek shell of itself. I mean, I killed it. And I get the call from, at the time it was Scene Magazine, I get the call to do the interview, and I could not have been more excited. First metal album I ever owned was Sabbath, Heaven and Hell. That was the first metal album I ever had, so I was pumped to talk to Ronnie Dio.
So how long after the review was the interview? 2
months.
Okay, so it was still fresh.
It was still fresh. And so I get on the phone, my phone rings, and I was still green as fuck. So I'm like, oh, hello, Mr. Dio. How are you, sir? I'm all shy and scared because it's Ronnie James Dio and it's stupid ass me. And Dio goes, is this Chris Akin? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, are you the guy that wrote? And he literally read it back to me. And I was like, oh, fuck. I was like.
That was another Chris Akin.
That other guy.
Know, but you know what? He asked me, and he read it back to me, and I admitted it to him. I said, yeah, I did. And he goes, so you don't like Angry Machines? And I said, no, and I'm a big fan, and, but I don't like this record. And he said to me, he goes, maybe you didn't understand what I was going for with this record. And he took 45 minutes to talk through what he was doing. And I'll be honest, it didn't sell me on the record. I still hate the record.
Did it still suck after that?
The record still sucks to this day. It's terrible. But I'll tell you what, I've never been more appreciative of anybody, because this guy, Ronnie James Dio did not need to waste his time on stupid-ass brand new writer at local paper in Cleveland. And he did, and not only did he do that, but when he came to town, when they came on that tour, he invited me to the show, shook my hand, couldn't have been nicer, introduced me to Jimmy fucking Page, no less, who just happened to be at the show. And from that time on, for the rest of his career, every time he played in Cleveland, I always met up with him, and he always knew my name. He always remember, and Ronnie James Dio meets a million fucking people a year.
He has a photographic memory.
But he'd be like, oh, Chris Akin, how are you? How have you been? How's your wife? He remembered I had a wife and shit. I was like, Wow.
Yeah, his memory is crazy. I met him Angry Machines, Strange Highways, and then Dehumanizer, whichever one came first. And the next year he did a show the same in the summer, the year after, and he remembered my name and remembered things we have talked about. So I could see how he replayed that interview back to you because he probably just had it in memory.
It was crazy. Well, speaking of crazy, I can't believe it, but we're already like an hour and a half in. So I think what I want to do is I think this has been fairly successful. It went pretty easily. I think what I want to do is wrap up here. Guys, definitely thank you so much for, taking the time. Victor, I can't even imagine what fucking time it is in Spain. But
10 to 5 a.m.
5 a.m. You are a trooper, sir. but I'll start with you, Victor, and we'll go kind of around the room. Podcasting is a real deal. It is the way of today and the future, I think, for getting your hard rock metal information as well as your entertainment information. It is the way that is not corporate. You're not going to get a lot of, high gloss bullshit. You're just going to get the real fans, because that's all any of us really are, is real fans. So, Victor, why don't we start with you? Give out the plugs. Tell people where they can download Mars Attacks, how they can sign up for Earpeeler, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. The easiest way is to go to MarsAttacksRadio.com. There's actually, and this is the same for all of the podcasts that I have going on, there are links to all the social media, all the links to iTunes, Google Play, RSS feed, so on and so forth. You can find all that at the top and the bottom of the page. To the right-hand side, you can find links to Earpeeler and all the other podcasts that I'm currently doing. Similar to John, I do a geek-related podcast called Galaxy of Geeks. I do 2 music-related podcasts, which I've currently relaunched, and then another one with just me talking about basically bullshit for 15 minutes. So all that good shit is right there on MarsAttacksRadio.com. If you want to go directly to Earpeeler, it is Earpeeler.com. Basically, similar to what said leading into what he just said. I mean, with Earpeeler, it's hard rock and metal is the main focus. Everything from audio to video podcasts. We've branched out with different things. Also, that was sort of both Chris and Mark giving me the suggestions there, and I've branched out with comedy podcasts, other sci-fi stuff, which John's podcast is included in there as well, wrestling podcasts, and comedy podcasts, if I didn't mention that already. And everyone's podcast that I've mentioned, I believe, or everyone that's on here, I should say, are featured on Earpeeler. So even if it isn't on, Blabbermouth or Bravehearts or whatever, I try to do my best to, make the rounds and make everyone know that each one of us have great shows and put a lot of hard work into this, and there's no reason why. If you want to hear Chris's interview with Phil Anselmo or Neely's with Stephen Piercy or whatever, if you want to search by genre, artist, whatever, go to Earpeeler and check out anything that you might be interested in looking for or turned on to new shows or whatnot. So there you go.
Awesome. Josh, what about Talk To Me?
Talk To Me is available on all your fine podcast apps, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher. You can always go to talktomepod.com. Shows come out each Thursday, and I guess I'll announce this here. I haven't announced it yet, but Talk To Me goes over to Uncontrolled Noise Thursdays, 7 p.m. Eastern.
Nice.
So I'll also be on Uncontrolled Noise now.
Very nice. How about you, Mark? Where can we get Talking Metal?
Yeah, the regular podcast outlets, iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker. It's on iHeart, TalkingMetal.com. We have the website up there. We're actually kind of doing some changes right now to the website, so there will be some additional content probably posted there in the next couple months. But right now it's Metal Raps, Talking Metal, and a show called One on One with Mitch LaFon, which I help produce and distribute. So, check it out, talkingmetal.com.
All right. John, Nerfherder Council?
Nerfherdercouncil.com. We are on Spreaker, Stitcher, Google Play, iHeartRadio, iTunes, all the normal places. So about the same. So we're throwing it out there. We are on the Uncontrolled Noise Network coming up here real soon. Victor, got to thank you again. We are on Earpeeler, thanks to Victor and being gracious enough to put our show on his network. And we actually might be getting on the Retro Zap network, which for nerd podcasts is really big. So anywhere you want to look for Star Wars podcasts, we're basically there.
All right. Joe?
Songcast is all indie artists, so you won't hear a lot of the big-name metal artists, but it's a great way to explore all types of music, metal, rock, jazz, country, blues, tons of different genres. Songcast.com will take you right to the front page there. You can download the Apple version of the app or the Android version, or you can put your email address in, have it sent right to your phone. And it's literally tens of thousands of artists from around the world, all types of genres, commercial-free and free to stream. If you're tired of listening to the same mainstream stuff and want to really explore the underground world of music, it's the place to go.
Sure, and of course the CMS is available at pornhub.com or lemonparty.org. So, whichever one of those you want to frequent, I'm sure you'll find us there. So, all right, well, guys, this has been really fun. I definitely want to do this, a couple more times. I want to do it across everybody's platforms to try and get the audiences to know, because and unless I'm wrong, I think we all agree it's tough to get it out there. It is a lot of work, and we want people to hear it. That's really, there's no money. None of us are, I've made $60 this year off the Classic Metal Show. It's not like there's like some ungodly amount of wealth to be made. So,
well, and that's what makes these podcasts so much better, is because people are doing them because they love the music and they love doing it. It's not some douche sitting in a Clear Channel studio that hates his job, which comes through on the air. Everybody that's doing these loves it, and it comes through when you're listening to it, and that's what makes them so great.
Certainly. Well, all right, fellas, thank you once again for doing it. I am going to end with some Overkill. I'm sure nobody argues that except John, who hates Overkill. But
I don't hate Overkill.
How about if we wrap this up with some brand new Overkill? This is Goddamn Trouble. So check it out from the grinding wheel. It's Overkill right here on your Classic Metal Show.